Welcome to the Flight Club Podcast, a woman's guide to leaning out. We give you a behind-the-scenes look at business launch and growth through the stories of successful female entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Felina Hansen, founder and CEO of Hera Hub.
Hello and welcome. I am excited to share my conversation today with Rita Albert. She is an attorney. She is certified to practice in both Illinois and California and before the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Over the last 20 years, she has worked in private practice as an in-house counsel and as a law school professor. And she is also a published author for several legal publications. She has also been very, very active here in San Diego in the nonprofit community and has worked for and or served as a board member to several organizations, including Cool Globes, Inc., the Children's School, Elite Rugby Foundation, Brighter Futures for Beautiful Minds, and Directing Change. And she is the executive director and legal counsel currently for an organization called ConnectMed. She manages the affairs, the operations for ConnectMed, and collaborates with their board of directors. Welcome to the show today, Rita.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's learn more about you. Take us back and tell us about you. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? All that good stuff. And we'll get into your career path.
Sure. Well, I am originally from a lovely town that nobody's been to. I'm saying that jokingly. It's not that lovely. Called Toledo, Ohio.
Oh yes, I've been to Toledo. It's a lovely town. Yes.
It's the type of town most people say that they pass through but never actually stop in. So, I was born and raised there, and both my parents were immigrants and doctors, and so I grew up in with a lot of medical professionals around me. And I went to college with the intention of studying biology, perhaps trying to go into medical school, but that is not the path that my life took.
So I want to pause there because I hear this story a lot. All my family were doctors, and then I became an attorney.
Right.
Kind of going against the grain there.
Right.
So when did you make that shift? Was it during your undergrad?
Yes. So I went to undergrad at Cornell, and I did start with a pre-med curriculum, and my major was, in fact, biology. But I, at a certain point, realized that I wasn't that interested in actually going to medical school. But what I found this area of law that I thought could be potentially interesting, which did require, a scientific background, this area of what's called intellectual property law. So after college, I took a gap year, and then I ended up going to law school in at Loyola University in Chicago, wanting to specialize in this area of intellectual property law, in which I could use, my biology background.
That's fantastic. These are very prestigious schools that you went to, and that is amazing. So
thank
you graduate from Loyola. What do you do next?
Yeah, so I graduated, and I started working at a law firm in Chicago that was a specific intellectual property boutique law firm. It's called, meaning that's all that they did was IP law. And I started working there as like a summer law clerk, and then they offered me a position after I graduated. And it was a really great first job because I got to be involved in some really exciting patent infringement lawsuits in the pharmaceutical and medical device space. And then so my past, I have a quite a meandering past, but I I met my now husband while I was working at the firm there in Chicago. I helped him publish a book, which back then was the first of its kind, if you can believe it. It was about intellectual property law on the internet. There wasn't many. There were very few articles, very few cases, and pretty much no books about that subject matter back in 2000 when the book was initially published. So we worked on that together in collaboration with some other people at this law firm in Chicago, and this book took us to California. That's how we ended up in California, because a lot of the intellectual property cases about legal rights on the internet, the forefront of that kind of law was on the West Coast. Well, the East Coast or the West Coast, but primarily on the West Coast.
Not in the middle. Not in the middle of the U.S., huh?
Definitely not so much in the now. I mean, of course, there's all kinds of lawsuits but everywhere, but back then it was mostly, like West Coast. So we ended up going to a IP boutique firm out here in San Diego. So I ended up practicing law up until my second child was born, and then it got a little bit too much, working as a full-time attorney and with two little kids at home. So I took a step back, and I had already started teaching. On top of everything else, I had already started teaching some IP law classes at USD, and also at Chicago Kent School of Law. So I took a step back, and I stayed at home for a while and focused more on the teaching part-time as an adjunct professor, and doing updates for this book, which was actually a really big chunk of work, as you can imagine, because the area of law was developing so rapidly that it took a lot of time to keep the material updated, which we did every year for their annual supplement. And I raised my family there for a while. And then when I was ready to sort of start re-engaging, that was when I focused a little bit more. I started looking at this area that had always interested me, actually, ever since law school, which was the nonprofit space. And I'd always been fascinated by it because, well, first of all, Loyola Law School, one of their strongest areas is the application of law in social work. So I knew a lot of people that were using their law degree sort of in conjunction with the delivery of social services. And I'd always found it interesting, this concept of a nonprofit organization and what it could and couldn't do, and how flexible it could be with regards to the types of services that a private organization, a private firm, private business, or a government organization could provide. So I just started, I first started serving on boards of some nonprofit organizations, and then once people realized that I was an attorney, that quickly morphed into oftentimes providing, legal counsel services, legal advice. And that I, over a course of several years, I was usually both a board member and or legal counsel to the different organizations that you mentioned in my resume.
I want to pause there real quick, Rita. It's just the story you tell is the story I hear every day. It's so interesting, and I've said this 100 times, but I'll say it again. I want somebody to do research on this concept, this stage of life that you're referring to. I meet so many women who it's not actually their first child, it's their second child, and they say, you know what? I don't want to go back into the corporate grind. I can't, do these hours. I need to control my own destiny. And
Right.
so just instinctively from the experience I have with Hera Hub and other organizations, I feel like it's the second child is the biggest catalyst for folks to usually branch out on their own.
Yeah, it's funny when I think back to that, it was actually an excruciatingly difficult decision for me, you know. I mean, as it is for, I'm sure, so many women who invest so much time and energy in their career to quote unquote give it up or put it on the back burner because there's a part of you that, I mean, it's just part of your identity. It's part of who you are. It's part of your value. And so to make that decision to kind of cut that part of you out of your life or to just make it less important, um, it's really really difficult. But at the end of the day, I'm an extremely like practical person, and I just couldn't justify the amount of help that I needed, like in terms of nannies, babysitters, daycare, etc. To you know stay with these two little kids at home, and of course, as many women do, I wanted to be able to raise my children. And
Yes.
now I have to say my oldest one is about to go off to college, and I am so incredibly grateful that I made that choice. I'm
Yeah,
so incredibly
absolutely.
grateful. Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you
But,
for sharing that. I
but
appreciate it.
yeah. But fortunately, I did, when I made that decision, I did keep, as I kept on telling my husband, like, I'm keeping my hand in this somehow because I knew that eventually I was going to want to come back and practice law or do something related to my background in some capacity. I just wasn't sure what that was going to be. I thought maybe I would end up trying to teach law full time. I knew I didn't want to be a professional legal writer because that's exceptionally rigorous and dull, I got to say. But I knew that I wanted to, do something. So I did. I made sure that I kept myself somehow active, involved in some sort of in related fields. So
Fantastic. And Rita, let's get into ConnectMed International.
mm,
How did you get connected with the organization? You've been there now, looks like about 10 years. So you've been there quite some
hmm
time. What do they do? Who do they serve? All that good stuff.
well, that's actually a really interesting and personal story to me. So ConnectMed, I co-founded ConnectMed 10 years, well, next year it'll be 10 years ago, with one of my closest friends from childhood, actually. So her name is Amanda Gosman. We've known each other since, I think, third or fourth grade. We were very close in elementary school, high school. We ended up going to college together. We were both at Cornell. We were roommates there. And then
Wow.
after that, she went off to medical school and I went to law school. And I like to say she followed me here to San Diego, but needless to say, about a year after I moved here, she moved here as well, which was just a wonderful, wonderful stroke of luck. And she is now the chief of plastic surgery at UCSD. And about 10 years ago, she started talking to me about a really specific need that she felt for to sort of capture like some sort of organizational structure to capture that what she was starting to do in a sort of disorganized way, which was to do sort of medical, surgical outreach, but in a way that was quite different from the traditional medical mission model. She had been involved with lots of different organizations that were more of like the true medical missions, bring in a team, do some surgeries and leave. And while she admired these organizations, saw a lot of strengths with them, she saw some deficits too. So she wanted to create a different sort of model that allowed for more like continued contact and sustainability, and that would also allow the community that we were serving to be strengthened and ultimately be able to take care of their own patient population. So after she convinced me that this would be a worthwhile cause, I worked with her to form the nonprofit. I did everything from the ground up, from articles of incorporation to like sort of helping to staff the first board of trustees, put together the initial board meetings, and we've never looked back. And now and it's amazing. Now we talk about, we really truly have come very far from, like, we laugh about what our very first board meetings used to be like in her living room, or our very first, not gala, which was just, nobody knew what they were doing. We just kind of threw things together. And now 10 years in, we have, this year we have 145 active volunteers. We had 200 people attend our gala. We have medical or educational collaborations going on now in about 6 different countries. So we've come quite far.
That's amazing. So when you talk about other organizations that are doing some of this work, for me at least, and it could be that, this is just what I've heard of, but Doctors Without Borders comes to mind. Maybe they've done well on the publicity side of things. Is that in reference to an organization? Is that the type of organization you're speaking about?
Oh, well, you know what? I actually haven't studied I don't want to speak about Doctors Without Borders, because
No, that's fine.
I don't really know what their model is like, but there are other organizations that she's worked with, and that I'm now familiar with. Like, I'm sure you've heard of, like, for example, Operation Smile.
Yes.
Yeah, they're more of like the traditional medical mission. Get a team from the U.S., go to a country, deliver care, and leave. And then I do think a lot of times they do come back, and that's, I don't mean to criticize them or put them down. It's just that, the way that she pitched the idea of ConnectMed to me was that it would be something different from that, because we would incorporate components, namely educational support, follow-up through using telemedicine technology, that would allow more points of contact, more long-term sort of collaboration and sustainability with our partner site.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great.
Yeah.
So you spoke about 6 countries that you're working in. What are those countries, and what type of work are you doing there?
Well, I mean, we're not active in every single country every year, because, as you probably know, we are still a very small team.
Yes.
So there's only so much that we can do. But we work in Mexico. We're working with Indonesian colleagues. So Mexico, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malawi, exploring some collaborations in Uganda, and then just some potential collaborations in some Central American countries like El Salvador. And then actually we have active psychosocial outreach programs going on right here in the U.S. as well, in San Diego.
That's great.
In Southern California. Yeah.
That's great. And what types of procedures are you doing?
Right. So I actually never specified that. So our scope is essentially to support full service multidisciplinary health care for children and young adults, and actually adults with any kind of like craniofacial abnormality, burns, or traumatic injuries. Yeah. So our team is usually like reconstructive surgeons and anesthesiologists for the surgical intervention, but then we really try to support the provision of all these other areas of care that are needed for full recovery from one of these conditions that I discussed. So we support speech therapy, physical therapy, psychological interventions, orthodontia, areas like that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I can see what you're saying, Rita, where, if you bring in a team of doctors, you do this thing and then you leave, there's so much more to that care management of that individual. So I
Right.
really that makes a lot of sense, really, looking at the whole picture.
Right.
So,
I mean, what
so
most people
yeah.
don't organize, or what most people don't realize is that, say you have a young person with, a craniofacial difference, he or she is going to require multiple surgeries over the course of life. In addition, in between those surgeries, there's usually some kind of therapeutic intervention involved, right? Like some speech therapy or maybe some physical therapy. And if you think about that, like for yourself, if you ever had surgery, even just one surgery, right? It's not like you get the surgery and you're done. There's follow-up. Maybe there's an additional one. There's some kind of therapy involved, oftentimes. So when you're dealing with somebody that has like a congenital condition or even an acquired trauma, I mean, the same kind of protocol is required potentially that spans over years.
Yep, makes sense. So a couple other questions related to this, Rita. Any overall numbers that you're able to share, impact over the last 10 years? And then also, how do you choose what communities to go into in these various countries?
Right. Well, so we're actually working on trying to calculate the numbers for the last 10 years. But I know last year, I believe our number was like 135 patients that we were able to benefit. And now when I say that, I don't mean like our team personally got in there and provided care for 135 patients. Either we did provide the care ourselves in collaboration with local specialists, or we supported specialists in training that they were able to then implement in the delivery of their care for a certain number of patients in their community.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And then your other question was, how do we choose? So,
Yep.
Right. So we don't really choose. So our process isn't to choose patients, since again, our focus really is on this long-term sustainability. We choose more partner sites.
Okay.
So we'll through our network, and especially since our president Amanda is the faculty member at UCSD, and many of our board members are also faculty or associated with big medical schools like University of Massachusetts or Baylor. Through their networks, we hear of potential clinics or hospitals with which we could collaborate that need or asking for or inviting, sort of some additional support to help them provide care in their own home community. And so then over time, we develop a relationship. We see what kind of support they need, what their patients' needs are, what kind of infrastructure they have, what kind of technology they have, resources they have, and then over time, we will develop like a relationship with a workable partner site that we then try to cultivate for years to come.
Yep, makes sense. Perfect. So, Rita, what are some of the things in the upcoming year or so that you're looking forward to, that you're excited about for ConnectMed?
Right. Well, so as I said, next year is our 10-year anniversary, so that's a big milestone. And I know that one area that we're really hoping to further develop partnerships is with a wonderful association in Africa called COSEXA. They're the I'm going to mess up this acronym now. As soon as I said it, I knew I wasn't going to remember. It's
It's
like
okay, don't worry.
college. It's like the College of Southern, Southeastern, and Central African Surgeons. So it's like a regional association of surgeons that essentially covers like much of sub-Saharan Africa, and we have a couple of connections who are part of this organization already, and our president Amanda will be going there, I think, a couple times over the course of the next year to explore some potential collaborations and potential partners and partner sites. So I'm really excited to get to meet some people in that region.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Wonderful. Well, Rita, if our listeners want to learn more about ConnectMed, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
People can just go ahead and email me directly at my ConnectMed email address is fine at ralbert, my first initial and my last name, ralbert@connectmed.org.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Rita. I have really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I have as well. Thanks so much, Felina.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Flight Club, sponsored by Hera Hub. We look forward to sharing more success stories with you soon.